absolute notions. What would our lives and families and communities look like if justice wasn't about retribution, but it was about making things right? Hello, everybody. It's Ivana Milicevic, and I'm really excited and putting on my big girl panties today because I have a real life criminologist, Dr. Ian Marder, on the show, who is an associate professor at Maynooth University. And he is the leader in Ireland and in Europe, kind of like in restorative justice. Is that correct? Did I
Yeah,
introduce you well?
definitely. Yeah, thanks so much. Yeah, I mean, I do a lot of work in restorative justice in Ireland. Also work a lot with, friends and colleagues in other countries where there's a lot of people trying to kind of bring this way of justice forward, I think.
Which is why I'm really, really excited that you're here. So we met Dr. Ian Marder at the premiere of the RTE documentary Natasha. And I was really moved by, I didn't even know what restorative justice was, or that it existed, or that it was something that was at all available to people. And I would think that I'm somebody who would know that exists, because restorative justice, tell people what restorative justice is.
So, restorative justice is the idea that people, after a crime has been committed or where harm has been done, they might want to talk to each other. Now, this is something that's totally voluntary. It could happen for any type of crime at any stage in the criminal justice process, but it's the idea that you should have a service there. So, if a victim of crime has questions that they want to ask, things they want to say, to the person who committed the crime against them, that there's like a professional service there that can prepare people for that, offer it to people, and also manage that meeting. Or they might not even have to meet; it can be indirect as well. Between through the person, there might be letters or questions being asked and answered without having met. And yeah, that exists a little bit in Ireland, but I suppose the work that we're trying to do is trying to make it better known and get there to be more investment in those services.
How how do you need more people doing it? Do you need more kids to know that this exists so that they can go to school for it? Or is it a question of funding? And even if these people existed, they couldn't be paid to do it?
Yeah, you do need more people doing it, but it is a question of funding. It's like anything in anywhere in public services really, is that, there's demand for lots and lots of things that aren't funded. And a lot of victim services are like that. Like a lot of the services that exist in Ireland and other European countries that are about supporting victims after crime or supporting them through the criminal justice process, these operate on a shoestring. Like you'd be shocked how few staff they have, and they're trying to work with everyone who wants their help, everyone who needs their help. And part of it is they're not very well known, and that does mean that, they actually don't work with that many people in practice. But what you'd really want is for these things to be available to everyone and
Yes.
for everyone to know about them and to be able to say, okay, well, this is what will meet my needs after what has happened to me.
Give
So
me an
this is what I
example of
want
what
to.
that means to people. Because what moved me in the Natasha documentary is, we might as well remind me again of what happened to
Yes.
Natasha O'Brien.
Yeah, so Natasha O'Brien is a young woman from Limerick who was very savagely assaulted in the street by a young man. And that guy was arrested and prosecuted and found guilty and received a suspended sentence in the first instance.
Why?
While the judge said something to the effect about, if you plead guilty early, then that's taken into consideration. They don't always say all the reasons for their sentencing, and that is a bit of a problem. Is that when we try and look at, we could conduct research on like why judges sentence the way they do. That's actually very difficult because they're not required to give full written reasons that then we're able to access.
And they're humans who could be having a good or a bad day like anyone else.
Oh,
When
totally,
the day that they're
totally,
judging, okay? So
absolutely.
this man brutally assaulted. Okay, there was alcohol involved,
Mhm.
whatever, with him. Assaulted Natasha, got sentenced, and then served no time
So yeah, in the first instance, he got a suspended sentence, but the case made the news quite a lot. A couple of reasons. One was that he was in the army.
Hmm.
I think that probably gathered some media attention. But also, Natasha herself did quite a lot of, advocacy as a result of this. There were a lot of people supporting her, through the process, and so like it was really because of her advocacy that I think the case became a large media story, that the documentary came about. And ultimately, what happened was the prosecution service took the decision to appeal the sentence for being what they call unduly lenient.
Yes.
And then so the guy eventually got, I think, 2 years in prison. That appeal was successful.
And this is where the story gets interesting. And please watch Natasha on RTE Player if you haven't seen it yet. The story gets interesting because after all this advocacy that she did, finally she has her day in court again, and he gets 2 years
Mhm.
or something. He gets 2 years in prison. And so he's getting put away. And now she is no happier. It's like justice is served, is it though, or whatever? But the point is, the victim, the survivor, let's say, doesn't feel any better. She's not like, well, great, now I'm okay. That wasn't her experience at all, and probably is not the experience of a lot of victims who end up getting, the guy goes to jail, whoever it is, the man, woman, and they're not now happy. They're
Yeah.
not now relieved. There's a
Yeah.
missing something that needs to happen.
Definitely, and we see this all the time. There's really this assumption in society that as long as the person goes to prison, then the victim's interests are totally satisfied. And, that's not the case at all. And
No.
we saw that so well in Natasha's documentary because loads of things happened that either, pissed her off anyway, or just the whole thing was not set up around meeting her needs. I mean, first of all, at the sentencing hearing, the judge said some stuff to her which was probably not malicious in its intent, but which she found to be really patronizing and demeaning. And that's what really, I think was one of the things that she was really upset about and talking about
Can you give
was
me
the
an
way.
example? Because
Yeah,
I'm
I think he
just
said something to the effect of, you should be happy that he pleaded guilty because that means that you were spared the suffering of a trial or something to that effect. And
right.
do you realize how good that is for you?
And she's like,
And
you don't know me.
yeah, exactly. I mean, he thinks he's probably helping, or at least is not conscious of the potential effects of that. And I mean, that's something you also see. Like, that wasn't the only interaction that she had, totally aside from what sentence a person got. There were several other interactions that were not beneficial to her. And one of them that I thought was really interesting was when the decision was made to appeal his sentence by the prosecutors. Um, she found out about that through the media. And you see her speaking to the prosecution service where she was like, do you think I should have found out about that through the media? Shouldn't you have told me? And so it's just, not systematically set up to make sure that people are informed about what's going
And
on.
when you say people specifically,
The
the
person most
victim, the
affected.
person
Exactly.
who it happened to, who we're trying to help. So
Exactly.
it seems like the system, maybe systems, are sort of set up without thinking about the victim at all, sort of. They're like, we're doing justice over here, and you just now you this happened to you and you did this thing. Now you guys sit back. We're gonna do justice, and it's not in any way related to them, sort of.
Totally. And I mean, this is exactly how criminal justice is set up in Ireland and other similar countries. And it's the same in the UK or the US,
Right.
where, it's the state takes a case against a suspect, and the question is what law was broken and how do we punish them for that. And so the victim or the survivor is not a party to that process. There's been some efforts to try and bring them in through things like victim impact statements, or through things like, people are supposed to be told about what point in the process the case is at and get a bit more information. But ultimately, it's not a system that is designed to meet victims' needs. So even when the system works well, as it ultimately could be said to have done in Natasha's case, the person got a prison sentence ultimately, but she was still left, and the documentary shows this perfectly, she was still left quite unsatisfied
Not
by
just
that.
unsatisfied. This is depression. This is bouts of crying, depression over how it's still not there.
And people are like, "Oh, you must be so pleased." And this is something I've heard from victims of crime before, is that when the system works well in theory and the person is prosecuted and found guilty and goes to prison, and people are like, "Oh, great! Isn't this great?" And yeah, exactly.
Congratulations.
And if it happened to you and you've got nothing out of that, you've still got nothing out of that. There might have been years of waiting for it to all happen. You might have been invited to give evidence. During which time you might not have been treated very well. Or it might be, as happens in most cases, that people plead guilty. And so your views, are just totally irrelevant to that process.
But you're here to bridge that gap.
Yeah.
So, um, tell me what you do then.
So
So,
yeah, this is what restorative justice comes from, is the idea that, the person who's affected by the crime and the person who commits the crime, these are the people with the biggest stake in the outcome of what happens, the biggest, who are most affected by how we respond to the fact that there was a crime. And yet they're totally excluded from the process. The state, one of our key thinkers is a guy called Nils Christie from Norway, and he talks about it as property. It's your property is stolen from you by the state. That conflict that emerges when someone harms someone else, and you are, excluded from the process by which decisions are made. To the extent that you're involved, it's only at the behest of the professionals who decide. Oh yes, give evidence, but only on this and not on that. Or the victim impact statement, like that's something that's very controlled. Like you're not supposed to say what you think should happen next. You're only allowed to say certain things.
that's
And
not
there
their
are,
job.
yeah, exactly. And there are reasons for that in the context of the criminal procedure where like people might, have a defense that needs to be tested or they plead not guilty. Like there's all sorts of legitimate reasons for that. And like you have to have a lot of protections there. And so it's this like totally unsatisfactory situation where you're trying to cram victims into that in some minor way. And, what I do is look at restorative justice, which is a totally different way of looking at justice. It's a way of looking at justice which asks, who was harmed and what are the needs that have arisen because of that harm? And then whose obligation is it to meet those needs? So this is about starting with the victim, starting with the harm and addressing and repairing that harm. And it's also not about saying that there's no obligations on the other person. Like just because it might not be prison, there might
Mhm.
be all sorts of things that the other person needs to do, even wants to do, or even that the victim would want them to do in order to, address and repair the specific harm that was done and also prevent it from happening again. And that's what a lot of victims ultimately do put a lot of weight on is like, I want this not to happen to someone else. And so we need to build that into the system. We need to build in opportunities for people who want it to be able to participate in making sure that that is what happens.
Give me a story that like because Natasha, this is in the middle. I don't know where she has not met him, her attacker.
Mhm, mhm.
Tell me a story where you've seen restorative justice do its magic.
So the first piece of research that I ever was involved in looked at people who were sent to prison for repeated burglaries and who had met some of the people that they burgled. This was in England. And in the first time that I interviewed a victim of crime, like I'm a researcher, so a lot
Mhm.
of what I do is looking at statistics or, mostly what I do is like interviewing victims of crime or observing restorative justice happen and trying to see what we can learn about it from that, or also working with professionals trying to raise their awareness of restorative justice. So this first case, what happened was that the thing that was burgled, among other things, was a very, very cheap, very sentimentally important piece of jewelry. And the person was very badly affected, really, by how sentimental it was, but also because they didn't see the person who burgled them. So they're very afraid of this person, like they've been targeted. In their head, as they described it, was like this big, cackling, evil shadow that hated them and wanted to get them and was coming back maybe and all this kind of stuff. And so when they met that person, those fears totally dissipated. As soon as they walked into the room, they saw that it was someone that, for whatever reason, they just weren't afraid of them anymore. It humanized them. Now, this happened to be someone who had committed a lot of burglaries, went to prison for that reason. They met them in prison, in fact, and they said that, obviously decided that they were not able to forgive the person, and that's totally fine. There's no pressure on someone to do that, but they felt like less of a victim after. They felt less afraid. They didn't get their thing back, but they asked for that, and that could have been an option. For some
Hmm.
people, really, they only want a thing back. I mean, this is where it's very high impact for the person who committed the crime as well, because another case from a similar piece of research that I was involved in, where what was stolen was a laptop, but on that laptop was photographs of the only photograph someone had of a relative who had died.
Hmm.
And so, for the person then who committed the burglary, like, these are not evil cackling people, right? I
Right.
mean, they may be, callous, right? Or there may be other stuff that they're thinking about, where, like, maybe they have a drug addiction, or maybe it's
Sure.
kids being, really reckless and stupid and thinking they're being funny when they're not. But guarantee that overwhelmingly, these are not people that are really thinking about the impact of their actions. They're thinking things like, well, they can just buy another one, or hasn't affected them that much, or it's justified for some or another reason. And then to be told, you know, my kids are really scared actually, or, that was really sentimental, or did you know that this is what happened? Like, that does have an effect on most people.
I wanted to know I've heard that when it comes to restorative justice, that it can be one on one, like you just said. And then I believe you sent me an article. Tell God's people a little bit more about what community
Mm.
restorative justice looks like, where like the community gets involved, so to speak.
Yeah. The beauty of restorative justice is that it's incredibly flexible. So, I mean, if you're looking to organize some sort of restorative justice process, the questions you're asking are, what harm was done and to whom, and what are the needs that have arisen?
Give me an
And that
example.
means, so if
Like,
so, I mean, everything from, two kids have a fight and it's just them, or maybe it's two kids have a fight, but the parents are involved as well, all the way through to, offenses where maybe there's not a direct victim, like, let's say, for example, something where, someone has damaged a public park in such a way that, makes an aspect of it
this
unusable.
happens all the time
We
at
do,
to
yeah.
Phoenix's little parks. Like the some clearly kids or whatever, they come and vandalize it and it can't be used. And I'm like, you took this away from 4-year-olds. Like
Yeah,
there's no
exactly.
way you wanted to do
And
this.
those are not evil people,
Of
right? The
course
chance of them
they're
being
children for sure.
right. So I mean, so what are we prioritizing then? Like, are we prioritizing, okay, put some additional suffering on them because that'll make them learn? Like, that's
It
not
never
really how
does.
people learn.
Tell people how it doesn't work. How I looked at some data that you sent me, and prison, so punitive punishment,
Hmm.
is that am I saying a double thing?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
Oh, no,
okay.
yeah, that's
So
okay.
punishment, as we all know, usually makes people who've gone through prison either worse or unchanged. What is the percentage of the people are changed by the system we have today? How often does that even happen? Is there a little quick percentage?
Yeah. So the Irish criminal justice system measures the reoffending of people who go to prison, and it's over 60% within, I can't remember if it's a year or 2 years, but ultimately Ireland is totally normal by international standards, insofar as we send huge amounts of people to prison, including lots of people for very short periods, like people who did not commit violent offenses, people who have, mental health problems or drug addiction or trauma in their background, all sorts of, and I mentioned those
It's
things.
always that. They didn't
Yeah,
lick it up,
it's often
right?
that. And I mention those things because those are things where we also do have services that are designed to help people in those circumstances. And it shouldn't be surprising that if you help people who have problems in their lives, like, you might be able to help them, in terms of their future behavior will benefit from that, right? But as soon as someone presents with the crime rather than with the other problem, we assume that the way to make that better is to intentionally impose suffering on them. And I can never get away from that in terms of, not just prison, but the idea that you should respond to crime with punishment, with retribution. It's that, you are righting the balance. Crime creates an imbalance, and you are righting that by intentionally causing that person harm. And I think
Right
there's
back.
something, right,
Like
exactly,
eye
eye
for an
for an eye.
eye.
And
Mhm.
I think there's something really interesting about that because, like, anyone who is harmed themselves or who sees something happen in society that they think is really harmful and who feels that that other person deserves to suffer because they've done that. That's so a natural feeling, right? Like there's people in this world doing a lot of things where my gut reaction is they deserve to suffer at least as much as they've caused other people. And those are people doing really harmful things. Also, it might be that someone bumps into you and you're in a bad mood and you're like, that's it, they deserve to die.
Oh my God. I used to have such road rage in
Yeah,
Los Angeles in the traffic, and it's hilarious when you look back. You're like you people do get shot in LA with their road rage,
right.
and it's not a real thing. It's just this moment of
Like everyone has a grievance, right? So the
yes.
question is whether and everyone is totally entitled to feel that, to identify situations where people have harmed them or harmed other people and to feel like they deserve something. Like that's all fine. It's just that do we want to organize a system around that? Do we, especially because as you said, the more we organize a system around that, the less we're going to be able to prevent bad things from happening in the future. I think that's something that, when I talk about this, like I do teaching in public libraries sometimes, and, we do a lot of stuff in the university, but part of my role is to try and get this out of there a bit more, obviously. And like people really, really want to have retribution and to have a system where people are helped in such a way that it prevents it from happening again.
I
And
think a lot of the people out in the world are assuming that when somebody goes, I don't think that they're thinking you're going to jail and you're going to rot there. I think people genuinely believe that people go to jail, to prison, and then they're helped there.
yeah,
That beautiful things are happening there
yeah.
because you see a little bit of like, oh, there's gardening and there's I don't know, candle making or whatever, and maybe some how much psychology and mental help is there in prisons overall? And I'm talking the West here because I don't even know what's going on
Yeah.
in countries that aren't as wealthy as Ireland, America, Canada.
It does depend on the country to a degree, but Ireland is relatively normal by at least Anglo-American standards insofar as we do not have anywhere near the kind of services in prisons that would actually mean that people can access them. Just the other day, there was a great article in the Dublin Inquirer where the person was looking at the waiting list for drug treatment in prison. Like huge percentage of people in prison have a drug-related problem of some kind. Like people go into prison not taking drugs and end up taking drugs while they're in there. Like
Yes,
prison exacerbates or creates mental health issues. It doesn't resolve them for people.
right.
And so
And then we
like
release them. We're like, well, you've served your time, but we have not caused. It's like how we all want a pill for everything as
mm,
opposed to dealing with the symptom, the underlying reason of why these symptoms have appeared.
definitely, and it's difficult, and it
It's
does require
difficult. It's
it
tricky
is
and difficult.
and it requires some give and take because I think that, a lot of people get their understanding of criminal justice from fictional media, right? Where,
What do you mean?
half
That's
half
how
the
it goes
movies,
down.
half the TV shows, and it like usually ends with the person going to prison. But of course, in reality, someone can go to prison for a period of time, and that's not the end. Like the overwhelming majority of people who go to prison in Ireland are going to come out. So the overwhelming majority of people in court,
Right. So
like these are your neighbors,
you've made them worse. You've put them away because they've caused harm. Then you cause them harm. They've become worse, and then you've let them out.
Yeah.
It's insane,
Yeah.
actually.
And this is where I think it's important to recognize that it's perfectly legitimate and natural to feel that retribution is important. But if you want a system that's really mostly about stopping it from happening again, you might have to forgo a bit of retribution. Like you can't always have everything. You can
Hmm.
have a system that's more oriented towards rehabilitation, or you can have a system which is about imposing, punishment on people. But these are contradictory. These are not really things you can always have at the same time. Like we have a bit of both now, and it's not really working.
Mm. Well, so this is what was also interesting to me about you when I met you, because what you are doing feels a lot like it's not a new style of parenting, but it's a style of parenting that is becoming more popular. And that is, it's known as gentle parenting. And when that's done wrong, it's of course a disaster, but it is not permissive. People often conflate gentle parenting with permissive parenting, which is like, you just do whatever you want, but I'm going to be like, oh, honey, let's talk to you. It's not that. So there's gentle parenting, positive parenting, authoritative parenting, or attachment parenting are really the same thing, which is treating the child with respect, with authority. Like, I am teaching you and I'm raising you and I'm going to lead you in the right way, but not just like, you messed up, so now you're going to be punished, as if somehow magically that punishment is going to make them understand what they did. So when I was figuring out how I was going to raise my son, I looked into, all these sweet ways to parent. And the science says that when you punish children, when you punish teenagers, when you punish your partner, nobody likes it. Nobody is learning something from it. What instead happens is either they decide one of four things, and this forms them who they are in the world. Either they believe you and they're like, I am a piece of shit. You're right. Yes. And it's full of shame and self-doubt. The second one is, I am going to learn how to lie better, or lie at all, because now I didn't know how to, because I'm not getting caught next time. The third one is, I will get my revenge. And that is either like, I will leave home before you know it. I will, when you're not looking, I'll get my revenge someday. And 4 is just escaping, where it's like, oh, I guess I kind of made that one with revenge. It could be revenge that you escape, but more withdrawing, say escaping from the situation, and now you're mute. I mean, how many girlfriends have you had before where it's like people who are bad at fighting and they just
withdraw into themselves. Yeah.
withdraw into themselves. So we know that it doesn't actually work in parenting. These children do grow up to be adults that have been parented, strictly, authoritatively, that have been just like, children will be seen and not heard and all that. But this is the justice system we have, built by people who have been parented this way. So I think this is where you and I have like a little bridge between us, because I am raising and privy to the next generation. If I parent in a more restorative justice way, where it's like, okay, who was hurt? How do we solve this problem? How do we... Listen, I lost my shit today with my son trying to get him to school on time. We're not perfect, okay? But more often than not, it is about repairing. It is about saying, like, I shouldn't have shouted. How do we... Okay, you spilled it. Okay, well, what are we going to do? It needs to be wiped up. I have an example with my dad, because my dad would have been an old school way. Bless his heart, he is in his 70s, so that is a completely different generation that it was spanked. I was spanked, but not as bad as my dad. My dad was not as spanked or abused like his father, right? So we're all doing better. Meanwhile, my kid never laid a hand on him, right?
Yeah,
never
exactly.
laid a hand on. I wasn't like abused. I just got a spanking, which was normal for I'm Gen X. Listen, we got spanked, right? Am I right, Owen? So my dad, when Phoenix was young, Phoenix kept trying to like change mess with the keys on his guitar, like try to untune it. And he kept saying like, don't do it, don't do it. Finally, he got angry. He put the guitar down and he said, I said no, and walked out of the room. And I said, Dad, what you've just done is you've left the thing that he's not supposed to touch. But what you have done is you've withdrawn your love from the situation. Wouldn't it be better to remove? That's a real consequence. You're not listening. I'm going to remove the guitar because we don't want you to break the guitar. You're too young to have the guitar, but I'm going to love you as I teach you this. And isn't that such a typical thing of what we do? We're like, well, we're mad at you. I'm leaving. And now we're loveless for that moment. Yet the problem is still there. The thing that I'm not supposed to touch, or the thing I'm not supposed to do, is still all around me. Do you know what I mean?
Totally. And these are things that are very difficult to do when you're angry or frustrated, right? Like remembering
that's our
to
job,
do them.
Though we're the ones supposed to get to therapy so that our nervous systems are regulated. Not that it's easy. I'm just
very true.
here.
And I mean, I suppose like all the stuff that I'm talking about, this applies in schools as well.
Tell me.
So I mean, like, I'm been talking about restorative justice in criminal justice, but in schools, and a lot of your listeners might have kids that go to schools.
They do.
Where there's restorative practices as part of that.
In Ireland?
In Ireland, yeah. In Ireland, there's quite a high amount of penetration of restorative practice in schools now.
Love it.
And what that is, as you say, like, it's providing a lot of support, but also providing high expectations, having high expectations of people. So it's not that there's no parameters, it's not there's no boundaries. It's just that when
Oh,
something goes wrong, it's not that you don't address it. You're not permissive, right? It's that you are very clear about the expectations of people and you're very supportive of them to meet those expectations. So, it's not just doing things to them, which would be punitive. It's not being permissive and doing things for them. They talk about it as doing things with people.
yeah. Listen, if the punitive worked, great, but it doesn't. We have to look at it again. Like we wouldn't be having this conversation if that just solved the problems. If you spank your kid and then they never do it again. No, we have these like dysfunctional adults that grow up that don't know still how to regulate
Mm,
themselves, still how to forgive, still how to make
definitely.
society better,
And
you
I
know?
think this is where, the schools have such a key role to play in this because where restorative practice is used in schools, or where it's being integrated into the curriculum, it's part of what's called social and emotional learning. So it's not just,
Yes.
what happens when something goes wrong, but it's like, how do you relate to people? How do you avoid conflict? How do you think about your own behavior, reflecting on like how something that someone has done makes you feel, and then how you behave as a result of that. Like, this is something that, most people who are alive now did not receive information about or opportunities to reflect on. So while we're there, copying math equations out of our textbooks, which we're never going to do again, and now we've all got calculators in our pockets, we
Mhm.
were never taught about, our role in how we behave and interacting with people and naming your feelings, being able to know, okay, like in your dad's situation there, like, did he even realize that, like, if he wasn't feeling so frustrated, then he might have shown love in a different way?
Mhm.
Like, are people able to name that, reflect on that, take a second? Like, I have friends who, train teachers in restorative practice, and one of them has a model which they call calm is a superpower.
Calm is a superpower. Calm is a superpower. That is a
And
fact.
that's just, that's not just you being able to take a second and reflect before reacting, but also then are you teaching people to do that?
Mm, yes. Such an important class that we did not have because you're a lot younger than me. What are you, a millennial?
I'm millennial, I suppose.
Okay.
Yeah,
But you
36
probably
soon.
had it better than I did.
I mean, I went to school in England. It was still copying out of textbooks. It
It's
was
still like
still
that.
people screaming at you. It was still
Yeah.
just, it was not,
Strict
yeah, exactly, exactly,
discipline. When we
exactly.
don't even, yeah, when we don't even get me into the
They weren't
education
hitting us,
system. Yeah.
no,
Yeah.
but it was sufficiently long ago that some of them still had their sticks in the table,
Just to
which,
remind you that there was a time and
yeah,
how
yeah.
lucky you
Oh,
are.
wouldn't I love to hit you with this stick?
Yeah.
And thinking back to it, it's like if you were, that person's age and you're like getting off on hitting, threatening kids with sticks. I'm like, man, there's and
What?
not to judge them too much because obviously they got beaten with
They
sticks
came from a
themselves.
system. Yeah.
So it is trying to, intervene in that at the individual level when something happens. I mean, this is where even criminal justice originally comes from, trying to prevent cycles of retribution. Like if you have small communities and someone hurts someone in another community and then they hit back and then they hit back, like theoretically, this is the point of the state having courts and taking it out of people's hands, is that you do something that is fair and transparent and means that, the state is the one that exerts power and you're not supposed to take the law into your own
Oh,
hands.
if only it were fair.
But that's
If
the theory.
only it were
That's the
fair.
principle
Yeah,
of why
sure.
you need to do something.
Yeah.
And restorative justice says, okay, can we
Do
do
something
something,
else.
yeah, that involves people?
What we're doing isn't working. That's all I'm saying. Thank you so much for coming here. I love what you're doing because it smells a lot like radical forgiveness and it tastes a lot more like love than the usual systems that we've got operating all over the world. So I think you're a badass.
Oh, thanks so much, Ivana. Thanks for having me. I really
Yeah.
appreciate it.
You're so welcome. Thank you. Follow us. Follow us on Instagram and subscribe to us on YouTube and all the places. You know exactly what to do. It doesn't cost you a dime. And then we get to brag about it to all our other friends who have podcasts. Thanks. Bye.
Absolute.